Welcome to Statlas Jam episode 3. Today we are talking about benchmarks. Benchmarks are a hot topic in our industry and something that we will often use to help our customers contextualize their journey. I really believe that the role of an agency is context. The benefit is that we get to work across multiple customers and multiple industries so that we can help bring insight into what is working across a broader spectrum of data. That's our role in your life in many cases. And so I want to talk about how to make benchmarks useful, because there are ways in which I think that they can be very helpful, and then there are other ways in which they are not helpful at all. I have this saying that I'll use a lot, which is that I think that benchmarks are generally useful and specifically useless, meaning that they have a general sense of direction where you can gain insight, but you cannot usually gain any specific knowledge from them because there's too much lacking context. But with that in mind, let's talk about some of the features that we have for benchmarks inside of Statlas and what to do with them. So inside of Statlas, we're always providing 3 views to the customer. We're giving them their individual view. In this case, you can see Bambu Earth MER. You can see the agency total MER and then the Statlas total MER. So 3 different data points. And we provide this in case agencies want to use our product. So they'll be able to see their individual agency. In that case, they wouldn't see CTC's total. The yellow line would be representative of the agency itself's data set. So it gives you some context to your individual journey, a broader data set, and then a little bit broader data set, because the Statlas total data set is about 2x the number of users of just the agency set. And so in this case, we're going to look back at Q4 for Bambu Earth, and we're going to explore ways in which we can derive insight from this data. So the first thing that we have a view of is MER, so marketing efficiency ratio, total revenue over total ad spend. And you can see here that our MER over that period was 3.89. You can see the 312 stores sampled in this data. You have the agency total MER. You have the red line of the Bambu Earth MER, and then you have the Statlas total MER, which you can see here. One of the things that is generally true is that MER in most cases, even in peak moments, does remain fairly constant for brands because they will tend to drive their spend up to match the revenue opportunity and maximize the margin at every level. So MER tends to be constant. These outliers usually represent somebody in the data set having a huge sale or promotion or something that creates that. So we'll turn that off just for distraction case. So Bambu Earth, you can see we have a spike in MER related to Black Friday, Cyber Monday, pretty normal. And then you can see that we dip way down in the holiday period relative to a lot of other brands. This theme that is true for Bambu Earth. So this is one of those data points that tends to reinforce an issue that we already know exists, which is that we tend to underperform holiday as a gifting product. Skincare tends to do that. Normally brands are driving more and more marginal gain from customers through the holiday period. It tends to be an awesome gifting moment. It's not necessarily the case for Bambu Earth. So understanding and thinking about why you are different than the norm is really where the opportunity exists in many cases. To ask questions of the data, not to assert answers. Again, it's not usually true that one thing is good or bad. It's a question of why is that the case? And that's what I would encourage you to do when thinking about the benchmarks, and to try to avoid inserting easy, short loop mental answers and continue to tug on the thread as much as possible. The other thing that's interesting in the way that we present this data is that you can see we show what percentile you rank in. So 3.89 is the 19th percentile in the data set. So that's pretty dang low, right? That's in the bottom quartile then of all the brands that are surveyed. You can see the average is 4.68. The median, always trying to present multiple measures of central tendency. And then you'll see the agency average and the agency median. So both of those give you an indication that 4-quarter accounting, or somewhere between 20 to 25%, is where the average amount of MER or ad spend as a percentage of revenue lives. Interesting insights to generate. Starts to think about how some of these principles of the P&L come to life. We can also bounce over to new customer acquisition efficiency. So this is AMER, or new customer revenue over ad spend. And again, we see that Bambu Earth is substantially below the average. Now, what do we know about Bambu Earth? High margin, high LTV. So again, before we just assert good or bad, we have to think about what we're trying to accomplish. And that's why we like to use the Trend Explorer to often look at the benchmark relative to your own goals, which is really the best way to look at data. But in this case, it gives you a sense of what brands are able to do. Sometimes what's hard for brands to understand is what is the universe of possible. And so I think benchmarks can be really useful for understanding the universe of possible. It's really easy sometimes to absorb stories about how brands have a 40-to-1 AMER. You heard about this brand doing $12 trillion on YouTube, but understanding the average outcome and saying that, okay, new customer efficiency for both the agency and the total data set sits somewhere between 2.5 to 3 is a 50th percentile outcome, which is pretty good. That means that as long as you have about 50 or 60 points of gross margin, you should be making money in that case. And again, our agency average is always going to outperform. There's some selection bias there. We work with more established, mature brands and like to think that we are also successful in the process of helping them be efficient with their new customer acquisition, as it's a primary area of focus for us. So you can see our average higher than this platform average. Now, some of the other places I really like to use benchmarks is in the individual ad performance, where you can see here, we're able to look at meta and we're able to look at metrics across CPM, CTR, CPC, ROAS, spend, revenue, etc. One of the things that often informs our sort of data and presentation is you'll hear a lot of stories about things like brands starting Black Friday earlier than ever before, right? And so one of the ways that we can take these narratives or hypotheses and use benchmarks to validate them is on a claim like that, where we can come and look at when did spend substantially increase throughout the month. And you can see there is an increase in early November, and then there tends to be a dip in the second week. And then the week of Black Friday, Cyber Monday, it ramps back up again. But you'll always see in almost every case that this peak really does hit the week of Black Friday, Cyber Monday in almost every case. And it's just not just spend, it's also efficiency tends to follow the same spectrum. Now, we in our data set are always going to have a flatter presentation of ROAS because we use cost controls. And so the variable is going to be more spend than it is going to be efficiency. But you can see the same is true, that leading up to Black Friday, Cyber Monday, efficiency tends to increase over time. That's always good to know. Again, creative metrics, you can get a sense of where you sit relative to expectation using these norms. And a lot of times what you want to see is where you are substantially different than a norm, either positively or negatively. And that's where I would look to drive insight. Where am I unique? Or in the case of something like this was a chart that I shared on Twitter the other day, which gives me a view of Emmy versus efficiency. One of the reasons I love this chart so much is that, again, going back to the idea of what's possible, there's a problem in any data analysis that I like to call the local maxima problem, which is to say that brands get anchored on the idea that their data set is indicative of what's possible, and they get stuck in a bound of thinking that's really narrow. And so sometimes to realize that there are brands doing $2 million a month at a 50 to 1 MER is a real eye-opener to the thinking about the sense of possibility. I was in a Slack thread today, and there was a operator that was talking about the challenges that his business were facing and sort of asking this question of, should I keep doing this? And sometimes understanding if you're, let's say, plodding around down here and you have been for many years, and it seems like despite all of your effort, moving the mountain is really challenging, understanding that there are brands that have the capacity to produce this level of efficiency, it starts you down a series of asking how. What would need to be true to have a business that's so disproportionately more valuable? Because these extreme dots, and look, this is even removing some really extreme outliers in the data to try and create a little bit more normal visualization. Understanding what is driving a brand that can produce $5 million a month at, let's see here, this dot's $5 million a month at a 40 to 1 MER. That set of questions begins to unlock really interesting answers that help you to think about how to drive a more valuable business. In almost every case, this has to do with some capacity to drive meaningful organic demand or really disproportionate LTV. And that sort of inference and analysis is what leads us to our methodologies, is that for many years, we've examined these dots. And because we have P&L access and access to all of their intimate data, we're able to deconstruct what makes them work and use that to inform how we think about what we recommend. So this kind of visual is really helpful. Another one I like is conversion rate. So again, what this helps me to think about is a normalized line where if you think about the relationship between average order value and conversion rate, what it shows you is that there is an inverse relationship, right? Should be pretty obvious that as average order value increases, conversion rate decreases, right? And you can see it's sort of this algorithmic, that's not the word I'm looking for, parabolic line, that's what I'm trying to think about. That is not perfectly linear relationship, but you can see that if you're at a $39 AOV and 7.46 conversion rate, you're going to produce the same amount of revenue roughly as someone with a $600 average order value and 0.33% conversion rate, which this to me is a helpful realization that like, oh, okay, good for conversion rate is relative. There is no such thing as a good conversion rate. Good is relative to your average order value, and there's a relationship between those things. So you can see that if you are above this line, what it's telling you is that your conversion rate is disproportionate to its average order value. So the further away you are from this line, essentially the more effective your conversion rate is. And what it tells you is likely you have a traffic problem, right? So substantially below the line, I think I've got more of a conversion problem or a quality of traffic problem. But in terms of thinking about insight to problem, that can help me think again, am I substantially above or below the average? And if so, is that an area of strength or weakness, and what should I do about it? Similarly, so Bambu Earth, like strong LTV, or a strong conversion rate relative to its average order value. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be any major limitation as it relates to our ability to convert the traffic. Additionally, here's a view of 60-day LTV lift, and you can see we're in the 97th percentile is one of the core attributes of this brand. So I think about areas of growth, conversion rate and LTV aren't probably the primary areas to grow because there's really not that much marginal gain to be had here. If I think about increasing from 28 to what is like some of the best brands, and again, there's outliers removed from this, to about 36%, there's not that much gain to be had in that effort. So really what it highlights is what's true about our brand, which is that the primary problem is driving more traffic, more organic demand at a rate that we can convert and make money on. So all of these insights are doorways to questions. I love the way we get to look at this. There's of course tons of different benchmark tools, but having it alongside your data is an environment to ask questions. It's an environment to create hypotheses. It's environments and doorways to deeper research. It is very rarely the answer. That's why I say it's generally useful and specifically useless. You will not walk away with very many answers, but you can walk away with a rich set of next questions to ask. And that's how we put the benchmark section to use.